everybody. Good morning, I guess, to our colleagues in Western Canada. Thank you to Farm Credit Canada and Agriculture More Than Ever for inviting us to participate in today's webinar session. We're really excited to be able to tell you about the projects we've been working on and hopefully give you a few tips and tricks on how to talk to those non-farming Canadians that so many of us have conversations with over the course of a day or a career. Today we're specifically talking about the Speak Up team training program, and I'm giving you a very condensed version of a course that normally takes a full day here at Farm and Food Care. The Speak Up team training concept I will get into a little bit more later, and we'll talk to you about how we came about starting this about 15 years ago. But first, I thought it was important to set some context for you as to who Farm and Food Care is and what we do, because many of you may not have heard of us. Some of you will have heard of us through our old names called the Ontario Farm Animal Council and the Farm Animal Council of Saskatchewan. Back in the late 80s, a group of farm leaders in Ontario came together and said, we're always so busy dealing with our sector-specific issues, whether it's dairy issues or crop issues, and we don't have one organization that has been set up to talk to non-farming Canadians on behalf of all of us. And that was when Farm and Food, or the Ontario Farm Animal Council got started, and soon after a group of crop group in Ontario got formed called Ag Care. Those two groups worked really well in Ontario for about 25 years, but we increasingly realized that as staff in the office here in Guelph, the crop girls were being asked a lot of questions about livestock issues, and the livestock staff were being asked a lot about crop issues, and we realized if agriculture is only 2% of the population, why are we subdividing ourselves even further into crops and horticulture and environment issues and animal care? So Farm and Food Care Ontario was born out of that discussion. We just celebrated our 3rd anniversary on January the 1st, and we were very excited to be at the launch of Farm and Food Care Saskatchewan this past December. And we would really hope that in another 5 years or so, you'll see farm and food care type organizations across Canada. What we are is we're a whole sector approach to telling the story about food and farming. Our membership consists of everything from the larger commodity groups in Ontario right down to fall fair boards and agricultural societies, agribusinesses, and then right down to the individual farmer who sends us an annual membership. And our common goal is to build trust and confidence in food and farming. Now I'm seeing one question on the screen that somebody is unable to hear the video. I'm hoping that that is an isolated incident and that the rest of you can hear this. We also created a national charity 3 years ago in 2012. So the farm, and thank you, Lyndsey. It's good to know that some of you can hear me anyway. The Farm and Food Care Foundation is a national charity with a mandate to enhance public trust and confidence in food and farming. We have a national board of directors with directors from across the country, and that board of directors works on issues of relevance to the whole country, because we always feel here it's a pretty small topic to be talking about agriculture in Ontario or in Saskatchewan or in PEI. We want to talk about it as a country as a whole, because there's so many similarities across the country. And we'll talk more about some of the foundation's bigger initiatives, like the Real Dirt on Farming booklet towards the end of this webinar. There is basically our boilerplate statement in a nutshell. I'm not going to read it to you, but we certainly want to connect farm gates to the dinner plates here in this country, and we would like to be seen as that one-stop shop for helpful advice about food and farming. If we don't know the answer, we know of a lot of people across Canada that will know the answers, and trying to connect to consumers so that when they have questions about their food and where their food came from, that they know to start with us, or at least that we can help them if they can't find another source of information. We are really delighted to be a partner with the Agriculture More Than Ever initiatives, and we can't say enough good things about the work that is being done at Ag More Than Ever. We see our projects and our work as being so complementary to each other. Over the last few years, Agriculture More Than Ever has done just an incredible job of rallying up the farm team, so to speak, and getting people from coast to coast to coast in this country eager to be good advocates and to tell their stories about food and farming. We see our role as being complementary to that, because we want to take that farm team, or those proud agricultural advocates, and then get them into the game and help them tell their stories to consumers. And we'll talk more about our Speakers Bureau training program later in this webinar. But again, we feel we have a really strong partnership with Agriculture More Than Ever, and we're always looking for ways to partner with them on projects. So speaking up for agriculture, as I said, this is a very condensed version of what we would do in a normal session here. The Speak Up Team training concept dates back to about 1998 here in Ontario. And at that time, both the hog sector was going through an economic crisis, and the discussion around the tables of the commodity boards in Ontario were that, you know, we've got a lot of really passionate farmers who are eager to tell their stories, but when they're dealing with really difficult issues like economic factors and potentially losing their farms and their businesses and their livelihoods, it can be a really emotional issue. And sometimes it's really hard to find farmers that are confident to tell their stories about food and farming, and they're afraid that they may say the wrong things. And quite frankly, there really never is a saying the wrong thing. There can just be better ways of saying it. So back in that time period, Ontario Pork started the process of developing a Speak Up team, where they had a group of farmers from across Ontario, close to the large urban centers, that were media trained and just had a little more confidence in telling their stories, so that if they did get a call from a newspaper reporter, an urban newspaper reporter in those areas, that Ontario Pork had a team of farmers that they could call upon to help with those interviews. At the time, I worked for the Ontario Cattlemen's Association, and we started work on our own team of farmers. And I tell you, during the BSC crisis of 2005, they were my absolute greatest ally and greatest asset as a communications person in agriculture. I could call those producers on a moment's notice and send television crews to their farms, or direct media to their farms. And I am still today convinced that part of the reason for the fact that beef consumption in this country rose during that crisis was because we had great farmers from coast to coast telling their stories. And anyway, that was the birth of the Speak Up Team training concept. Since then, my colleague Crystal Mackay, who was at Ontario Pork, and myself have both found our way to farm and food care, and we've taken this program a lot bigger. We have trained hundreds of farmers across Ontario specifically, but much broader than that. I've been invited personally to speak to, you know, egg producers in Alberta, and beef farmers in BC, and potato growers in PEI, and it's exciting to know that aquaculture producers in the Maritimes. And it's really both rewarding and exciting to see that this Speak Up Team concept has gone coast to coast and has been a real success. So anyway, today we're going to talk a little bit about who the average Canadian is when we're talking about speaking to the average Canadian. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how to speak up for food and farming. We're going to go through some question and answer techniques depending on the type of question you were asked. And then at the end, I'm going to give you a little bit of a challenge, and we're going to do some brainstorming on ways to further your agricultural advocacy work. So when we're talking to the average Canadian, we are talking to the 97% of this country's residents who don't know who we are or what we do. We're now at a point where less than 3% of Canadians farm. They don't know farmers or what they do, and I've told a lot of the farm audience that I speak to that farmers can be a very mysterious group of people. The average Canadian knows they exist, and they see those farms when and if they're driving out in the countryside, but they may have never met a farmer, or they don't have a clue what farmers do. They don't get science or studies, and we in agriculture have always been very good at spouting science and studies, and we may be less good at talking about the emotional side and why we do what we do. They love animals, but their connection to animals is very different than the livestock farmers in this country. The picture you see on the right-hand side there is from a website where you can go and spend a couple $100 if you have the money on a costume, a Halloween costume for your dog or cat. So when we're talking about caring for animals, we're often dealing with people who this may be their concept of caring for animals. They have, the average Canadian is very well educated, but not very well informed. They have a lot of disposable income, so the conversations we have about food in this country certainly don't happen in countries where there isn't the abundance of food that we are so blessed to have here. The average Canadian loves the words free and natural, and they like their food being alluded to one of those titles. They get their information from the media and the internet, which can be both an opportunity for agriculture and also a challenge, because there are so many websites out there with misinformation that we're always trying to contradict. And the average Canadian is scared of everything. So if you read the news lately, wheat is bad, red meat is bad, GMOs are bad, fat is bad, sugar is bad, chemicals are bad, corporations are bad, and the list could go on and on and on. I could fill this slide with all of the food scares that we've heard, and these are all in the media all the time. And again, the average Canadian has never been hungry. They demand safe food. They don't want to feel guilty eating that food. And I don't know all of you on this call, obviously, but I'm assuming the average Canadian is not on this webinar. They are not on that farm team that we're so proud of. And that picture there on the left is my favorite Halloween costume from poor dog, yes. Anyway, my favorite Halloween costume from that website that I was on. Every 4 years here at Farm and Food Care, we do a survey with Ipsos Reid, and we poll 1,200 Canadians from coast to coast, and we ask them an awful lot of questions about food and farming. We ask them their opinions, their biggest questions. If they could say something to a Canadian farmer, what would it be? And we take all of these results, and the results really help shape our work here at Farm and Food Care over the next 4 years. This was the survey from 2012. We're going to be going back into the field in 2015. It'll be interesting always to see the changes, but the one thing we did ask them in 2012 was what was their current knowledge of Canadian farming. And you see on the slides there that at 2012, 7% of Canadians said they knew a lot about food and farming. 52% said they knew a little. 37% said they knew very little. And 10% said they knew nothing at all about farming practices. Now, I have been asked by a number of farmers and audiences I've spoken to, does that 7% really know a lot, or do they think they know a lot? We have no way of knowing that, but that's what they believe their knowledge is. And I should back up and say that these 1,200 Canadians that we poll are non-farming Canadians. We ask that up front before they're included in the survey. When we ask them what types of farms in Canada they know the most about, you can see the survey there. So they think they know the most about Canadian beef farming. Not far behind are dairy and vegetables, followed by grain, fruit, and chickens. At the bottom of the list there, you'll see turkeys, veal, and fur. If you think about those types of farms and what they mean, the easiest way that we think is to explain kind of why they think they know the most about the top ones and not about the bottom ones is because the top ones are the most visible. If you drive down a country road, you're likely to see beef cattle or dairy cattle, depending on the part of the country you're in, vegetable farming or grain farming. You're not likely to see turkeys or fish or hogs or veal calves or mink if you're doing a drive-by, and that really helps to answer kind of where they see their current knowledge. And sorry, I've just let me just go back to, there we go. Back when we started doing this study, we got our feelings hurt early on. It was easy to say. We asked the average Canadian if they wanted to learn more about farming. And in those early days, in those early surveys, less than 20% said they wanted to learn more about food and farming. Now, I'm a farm girl from Ontario. I am super passionate about where my food comes from. I think everybody should be as passionate as I am. And that number hurt our feelings. But we talked about it in the office and we wondered if it had something to do with the word learn. Because if you'll remember back on an earlier slide, the average Canadian doesn't get science or studies. So we changed the wording of that question, and in the next survey we said, would you like to know more about food and farming in this country? And the numbers completely switched, with more than 2/3 of the Canadians that we polled saying, yeah, we'd love to know more. So that was kind of funny for us because it was the exact same question. And it goes to show that we always have to be a little creative when we're trying to tell our stories. A lot of the things we do here at Farm and Food Care would fall into a category with a term called edutainment, educating people, but in a really fun way, providing a fun learning opportunity for them. And we think that that's really working for us. So they want to know more, but they don't want to learn it, and that can be a bit of a challenge, but a good opportunity too. Without knowing a farmer, where do consumers get their information? There is a lot of noise that can often exist between the primary producer at the bottom of that chart there and the consumer at the top. There are a lot of people trying to tell our stories, and it can sometimes be a real mountain between farmers and consumers. Here's the sources of information. Again, we asked them, where are you getting the bulk of your information about from food and farming? Television was still number one in our 2012 survey. The internet was down there at 30%, with websites at 23% and blogs at 6%. Twitter much further down. You'll see at the bottom, you have not received any information on these. 23% of the people surveyed said that they're not getting any information about food and farming, and they're certainly the group that we want to reach. It was really important for us to find out how credible sources of information were when we were polling these people. So we broke this into 3 categories: sources of information about animal welfare, sources of information about food safety, and sources of information about farming and the environment. Here's the first one, believability of information sources about animal welfare. You'll see there that farmers are tied for number 2, with university animal science professors below veterinarians. So they have an extremely high credibility rating when it comes to talking about animal welfare issues. I should note there that I guess as a communicator, I've always been of the belief that if I can find a farmer or somebody in the agricultural sector that works directly on a farm or in an agribusiness, I'm gonna get them to do media interviews as much as possible. Sure, I have a farm background and I have a solid knowledge of a lot of issues in Canadian agriculture, but as a girl working in an office in an office building here in Guelph, I've always thought that farmer or rancher or agribusiness staff who gets his or her hands dirty every single day out on their farm or in their business are a much more credible source of information for doing media interviews than me. And if you look down that list, The numbers agree with that. You'll see an association representing farmers. That would be me. Further down the list, which again goes with the credibility that exists with that farmer talking. Here's believability of information sources about food safety. Farmers are tied for third in this category. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency and dietitians are ranked number 1. University nutrition professors are ranked number 2. And Farmers and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada are tied for number 3. So again, a really, really high credibility rating on this one, and associations representing farmers like me a little further down the list. And then believability of information sources about the environment. Farmers again tied at number 3 with 58%. You can see there a University Environmental Sciences professor would be number 1. Engineers number 2, farmers and ranchers number 3. I'm always relieved to see that the well-known celebrities that often get up there and speak about food and farming, but may never have been on a farm in their lives, always rate low down on the credibility rating. That always kind of reassures us here. So their overall impressions of Canadian agriculture, though, they like food and farming, they like farmers, and you can see that by this statistic here, and the numbers continue to increase, which is really reassuring for us. Overall, we've got a really good story to tell, and people find it very credible. You'll see there that the numbers in 2012, 56% of Canadians said they had a very positive or somewhat positive impression of food and farming, up from 52% in the last study and 41% in the study before that. So anyway, we've got a good story to tell. It's getting out there, and those numbers are really reassuring to all of us who work in this industry trying to tell the stories to consumers. And then we asked them, kind of unaided, why are the top things, why do you believe that Canadian food is safe, and what are your reasons for your positive impressions of Canadian agriculture? And here are the unaided questions that came back in the categories. There's dozens and dozens of answers on this, but these are the top answers that we received in that. So you see there that number 1 answer by far was that food in Canada is safe, well inspected, and has strong quality control. Canadian farmers are ethical, and our farms do better financially than farms in other countries. And then you can see the rest of the numbers there. Those are the top numbers, but there were dozens and dozens. There are very positive impressions out there about food and farming, and these numbers show it. So as I've said, I've always believed that our absolute best asset in Canadian agriculture are credible spokespeople. We have such solid, passionate, well-spoken, committed farmers and veterinarians and scientists and researchers and agribusiness staff, and the list goes on and on and on. And these are the people that Ag More Than Ever has been working to fire up and get going. And certainly these are the people that we want to put in front of the public and get them to tell their stories about food and farming. So when you're speaking up, we always say start with yourself. You need to do a strong critical analysis of who you are and what your strengths are before you embark on that speak up initiative. You need to know your strengths, and you need to acknowledge your weaknesses. Are you really good at presenting? Are you comfortable standing up in front of an audience? Do you like writing? Are you solid with background information? Do you have a photographic memory and you can remember facts and stats, things that I don't do very well at? Are you really confident in talking to kids? Or would you be comfortable talking to your local legislature about an act that's coming about? Are you comfortable talking to your Chamber of Commerce? Would you be comfortable talking to a media person, an urban media person? And what are your passions? Are you an environmental specialist? Are you really passionate about animal welfare or something else? You need to know your strengths and you need to know your weaknesses. And if public speaking, if you'd rather have a root canal than do a public speaking engagement, then maybe standing up in front of a local audience is not your forte, but you'd be really good at writing letters to the editor or getting involved in social media. I have some farmers over the years who just melt my heart when I put them in front of a school class and they bring in a newborn, excuse me, a newborn piglet, and they talk to that school class about raising farm animals, but they wouldn't necessarily be the most comfortable talking to a group of politicians at Queen's Park here in Toronto. And if animal welfare is your passion and you're asked to talk about an environmental issue, you might be better suited to pass that one along to somebody else. So know your abilities, know your strengths. Are you good at talking off cuff? Do you need to be rehearsed? Are you going to get nervous doing a live radio interview? These are all things you need to think about, and yourself. Nobody can tell you otherwise before you start the process of figuring out who you're going to speak to and how you're going to do it. The number one rule is to always make that first impression great. You may be the only farmer or the only person in agribusiness that person ever meets. And I always say that we that work in this sector are sometimes on duty 24/7 trying to tell our stories, because I know from my urban group of university friends, I was kind of a rare breed being that farm girl, and they would always bring all of their questions to me because I was their only source of information. And you never know when you're going to have an opportunity to make that first impression. A few years ago, I was in an airport shuttle on the way to the airport in Toronto. It was about 4:30 in the morning, and I'm not at my best at 4:30 in the morning. And everybody else in the shuttle were heading to an exotic vacation destination in the winter, and they were all kind of comparing notes on what great vacation all-inclusive package they had won. And I was going to a conference in Halifax, a poultry producer conference. And so anyway, the conversation, eventually somebody realized that I wasn't participating, and they said, well, what do you do? And I said, oh, I work for a farm organization, and I'm on my way to talk to a group of poultry producers in Halifax. And somebody from the back of the van said, isn't it a shame what's happened to Canadian farming these days? And I said, and what do you mean by that? And they said, isn't it a shame that all we have left in this country are factory farmers? And again, it's 4:30 in the morning, and I'm not at my best, but it was that one opportunity I had, and maybe the one person that person would ever have a chance to talk to. So at 4:30 or 4:45 in the morning, we had a great conversation about how 97% of Canadian farms are still family owned and run, and what an incorporated farm might be, why farmers might choose to incorporate but still run with their families. We had a great conversation. Everybody in that van had to listen to it, but it was that one opportunity, and there's been many, many more incidents like that in my career. So you always need to think customer service with a smile. We're not a salesperson. I'm not trying to sell canola or sell wheat. Some of you may on the phone maybe. I'm just trying to build appreciation and understanding, and trying to tell my side of the story about why I'm passionate about this industry. Body language speaks volumes, and we'll talk more about that in a few slides. I always say be positive and invite discussion and avoid debate wherever possible. Know who you're talking to. It's always good to be able to get a little bit of a feel for the background of a person that you're talking to, whether it's a media interview or whether you're just talking to somebody at church or at your local fall fair. Get a sense of how much they know about your industry and what their concerns are. As a farm person, the average Canadian will think that you may know everything about everything in agriculture. They don't realize how segmented we've become, and that a poultry producer might not know questions about beef farming, etc. But it's always good to, get a sense of their concerns and then be able to refer their questions if possible. I always say, as a person working in this industry, it's always really important to keep up with the media, and that's both rural media and urban. You may be working a booth at a local event and be asked a question about something in the media. Again, you're that farm person. They've seen a farm story and they may ask you about it. You, again, may not be the right person to answer it, but taking down their name and offering to find them the information is always a really valid thing to do. Talk about what you know, but not too much. We always have a habit when we get nervous speaking in front of a crowd or speaking to an audience that we can tend to talk too much and you want to tell them everything there is to know. But you know, the rule of a good media interview, and Lyndsey may have covered this in the previous webinar, is that when you're done answering a question, stop talking, and you're less likely to get yourself in trouble, or just, you know, keep going down that rabbit hole if you do just answer the question and stop. Use personal and specific examples. Talk about what you know. If you're a farmer, talk about what you do on your farm. If you're an agribusiness, talk about what you do in your organization. Avoid or explain industry terms. We are brutal in Canadian agriculture about using acronyms and terms that only we understand, and it can almost be a mysterious language that we talk when we're talking to each other. So think about that terminology that you're using when you're talking to non-farming Canadians, and try to simplify it into a way that they would understand. And again, the keep it simple, stupid rule, the KISS rule, using easy to understand words and explanations, and trying to keep our jargon out of it. We in agriculture, again, talk a lot about farm language. We use farm language. We talk about farm cash receipts. We talk about crop yields. We talk about commodities. I was at a farm writer conference, a Canadian farm writer conference, a number of years ago, and an editor for the Toronto Star was there, and he challenged all of us communicators in the room, because he said, you're all really good at talking to each other, and your press releases often talk to each other. But he said, when I get a press release into my office in Toronto, I want to know what it's going to mean to my readers. So you talk about the price of wheat going up. I want to know if the price of bread's going to go up for my readers. So, you know, general public language you see there is about the economy, the environment, healthcare, innovation. You know, always be yourself when you're having these conversations, but remember that not everybody is you, and not everybody understands the topics that you deal with on a day-to-day basis as well as you do. So when you're speaking up, you never guess or generalize. You know, use your opinion. You're the expert. They wouldn't be asking you otherwise. But talk about what you know, and don't guess at the answer. Whenever possible, use specific examples from your farm or your business. And again, if you are not the expert and you do not know the answer, refer them to somebody more appropriate. And what if there's a real problem? Because there are real problems in our industry at times. You never say never. You never ever say when you're talking to somebody, this will never happen, because they may be challenged to find that one instance when. You show your care. If there's a really bad news story about agriculture on the news and you're asked about it, you know, show as an industry and as a person working in this industry how much you care and how disturbed you are by the same topic. You know, accept responsibility, and I always say never pass the blame or deflect. Adding to that, I would also say never deflect to another commodity or another type of farming operation or another industry. We are so small in agriculture that we can't afford to put the blame on say organic versus conventional, or beef versus dairy, or anything like that. We're all in this together, and it's really important that we all sit on the same team for our discussions with the public. And then again, as an industry, if you're asked about, you know, some real problem that exists in the media, what we as an industry, you on your farm, you as a commodity group, you as an agribusiness, what you're doing to ensure that a problem like that never happens again. It's absolutely critical that you always put caring into your message, because it doesn't matter if you know every fact and stat about what you're talking about. If you don't show compassion and passion for what you do and why you work in agriculture, it's completely irrelevant. They won't even pay attention to your message, because you'll have lost them on the empathy side. And that pie chart that you can see on your screen there really shows that. 50% of your answer comes in the caring. Just touching a little bit on dealing with difficult people, because sometimes we in agriculture do deal with difficult people. And I guess a very current and really real example that I'll use again later is the Farm 365, Farm 365-day hashtag that's being used on Twitter right now. That has been a really good example of that 5% irritancy factor. remember who your target audience is when you're telling your stories via Twitter, via your Facebook page, via a blog you've written, via a media interview or a conversation with a community group. Remember who your target audience is, and remember that you're talking, to that average Canadian that really does want to know more about who you are and what you do. There's always going to be that very small percentage of Canadians that will not agree with anything you do, why you do it, and they would rather put you out of business or get you off your farm. Don't worry about them. Remember who your target audience is and answer those questions. And the farmers who have been participating in the Farm 365 movement for the last couple of weeks since it started have been doing an amazing job of telling their stories and not letting the activists kind of railroad their talks and their presentations, and it's just been a really good example. There's a lot of school groups now following that and doing class projects on farming and following some of the farmers that are in that movement, and I just think that's amazing. Real Canadian consumers are going to that and asking questions about milk and about meat and about growing crops, and I just think that that movement has a lot of potential for greatness. Remember, difficult questions often come from difficult people. If you're working a booth, and I've worked a lot of booths in my career as an agricultural communicator, the number of times that I've dealt with really difficult people at any of the exhibits I've ever worked, I can count on one hand. And sometimes they are just having a really bad day and they just want somebody to rant to, and you are their target. And if you have time and if you don't have a lineup of people that have legitimate, real questions to ask you, there's nothing wrong with letting them rant for a little bit. They may feel good, and they may, it may get it off their chest. And then you can ask them again if they have a specific concern. Everybody is invited to their opinions. Just because one person's a vegetarian and another one isn't doesn't make one right and one wrong. And again, as I said in an earlier slide, invite discussion and avoid debate and confrontation. When you're dealing with difficult questions, try to establish what the real difficult question is. And sometimes they may not have reframed it right. They may be asking a question about something completely different. So I would say, make the effort to ask a couple of extra questions on your part to try to delve down to what their real issue or their real question is. And then if you're still not sure, or again, if you're not the right person to answer that, don't guess at the answer. Offer to take their contact information and find it out, and make sure you get back to them. Always have a pen and paper available if you're working at a booth, and certainly sending them to groups like Farm and Food Care Ontario, Farm and Food Care Saskatchewan, Agriculture More Than Ever. We are all, we've got a lot of people that we know across this country that know a lot of smart things about agriculture, and we can help find that answer and get it back to you. And again, going back to an earlier slide, just because their opinion may be very, very different from yours doesn't make them wrong. So when talking to anybody, be yourself. Be really patient and positive and proud. We are all proud of working in this industry. We wouldn't be in it otherwise. I always say working in agriculture is a little more of a cause than a career, and I believe really strongly in that. Respect each other's opinions when you're having a discussion, and always think when you're having a conversation with somebody who may, maybe just be asking questions, what's your purpose in having this conversation? Do you think that there is a way of getting to a common answer or a common platform at the end of it? And again, if not, maybe just agree to disagree and move on with your day. And keep it simple. When you're working at a booth at one of your big shows or fairs, you may have their attention span for 30 seconds to a couple of minutes, so you can't tell them everything that there is to know about your industry or commodity. You can't give them the War and Peace. You may be able to version of your topic. You may just be able to give them 2 or 3 key points. So keep it really simple and basic, and think about what key messages you would like to leave them with when they leave your booth or your exhibit or listening to your talk. I said a little while ago we were going to talk about verbal and nonverbal communications. Certainly when you're talking, here's some of the top do's and don'ts about talking about food and farming. Being modest, being reasonable and open, not having your arms crossed when you're giving a presentation, being relaxed and friendly, positive and confident. Those are all real door openers for any conversation you're going to have with consumers. Try really hard to stay away from sounding smug and arrogant, laughing at questions that you consider to be a little absurd or that they already should have known the answer to that. And I've seen that happen before, and you leave that person feeling really poor about their knowledge, and that's not what we're here to do. We're here to be the helpful experts on food and farming. So don't sound hostile or defensive. They may be asking a tough question, but they may not be trying to point you into the corner. They may genuinely want to know the answer to that question. Being uptight, being negative, or trying too hard to please. Those are all things that'll turn people off when you're trying to talk to them about food and farming. Body language always speaks volumes. So when you're staring or you're looking away or you're distracted when you're talking to them, furrowing your brow. So if you've got a speaker in a room and you're doing the obvious, I don't agree with what you're saying, furrowing your brows, your arms are crossed, that's a really negative reaction to a speaker. Crossing your arms, putting your arms behind your back, invading their personal space. Keep a respectful distance from them when you're having a conversation from them. Checking your watch or checking your smartphone is always a terrible thing to do. And when we talk about good boothmanship or good networking here at Farm and Food Care, we always remind our employees that when you're working in a booth, don't be checking your watch. Put your smartphone away and just check it on breaks. But if you're trying to answer a question of a Canadian about food and farming, and you're checking your smartphone to see if you've gotten any messages or what time it is, you're going to lose them instantly, because remember, going back to that earlier slide, you're not showing that you care. And chewing gum, I always tell everybody that I do an interview with that if you're going to be doing any sort of public speaking or any sort of media interview, or you're going to be on TV for some reason, just get rid of that gum before you do it. It's a really basic thing, but it can be very distracting. So going a bit into some question and answer techniques, depending on the type of question you're asked, you may decide to answer it in different ways. And in our full day sessions on Speakers Bureau training, we talk about some of the key ways that you can answer a question. So the most common technique that people will use, we call the benefits technique, where you're giving people, you're focusing on the why you do things, not the how you do things. So you're talking about why you would keep animals in a barn in the winter, and looking out my window here at the snowy Canadian climate, it's a pretty easy answer this time of the year for sure. Why, if you use crop protection products, why you might use them on your farm versus the specific dosage rate or whatnot. Why you might dehorn cattle or trim beaks. When you're explaining the whys versus the specifics of the hows, you're going to get a lot more information across and do a lot better job explaining the benefits of using those types of techniques. The rules of three, again, this goes back to what I said earlier about you're not going to be able to tell them everything that there is to know about your industry in the short time you've got their attention. So, thinking of the three main points that you want to get across to them and trying to get through those in the short time span you have with them. And that goes back to all of those essays we wrote back in our high school days with a logical introduction, a middle, and a conclusion. Again, splitting things into threes is a really simple way. People tend to remember threes. Answering a question with a question, making sure you understand what they're asking. And a really kind of an amusing anecdote that we still remember here at the office was a number of years ago. We had a woman come up to one of our exhibits, and she was really concerned about the way that she thought veal calves were raised in this country. And so I said to her, what specifically have you heard? And I guess you could have started answering, why we raise veal calves the way we do, the housing that they live in, etc. But her question that came back to us was kind of startling. She said, I hear you feed them battery acid. Well, that was kind of a shock to us. We had never heard that one before. So we delved down, and by asking many more questions, we got down to electrolytes. And she had heard the word electrolyte, and somehow in her mind that had translated to battery acid. And we were able to explain electrolytes using a Gatorade reference and explaining, why farmers might give their calves electrolytes. She left our exhibit feeling very confident and comfortable about raising veal calves. And it took a bit of work to get to that point, but by answering a question with a question, we were able to delve down to exactly what she had heard and then allay her myths or her fears, and that was a really positive conversation. So, using that, what specifically do you mean by that, and spending a bit more time, you can often get a lot further in a discussion. And then the compromise technique. This is really good for those toughest questions. You've seen an undercover activist video on TV, and you know that your non-farm friends are going to ask you all about it. This is really good for those kind of really extreme situations where you can say, yes, you know what, that is an absolute extreme. On my farm, we do this, and on my farm we work really hard to ensure this doesn't happen, and here's what we do on my farm or in our industry or in our sector to make sure things like that don't happen. So acknowledging problems, that there are some bad actors in agriculture like there are in every industry that exists, and showing your commitment as a producer or as a person working in this industry, and then looking to the future, that we're always looking for ways to improve things on farms, and research is helping us to do that. And then that picture paints 1,000 words. So making a general statement and then backing it up with an example specific to you or a situation that you know about. So you could say, farmers in this country really care for their animals. And then you can be a lot more specific. On my farm, here's what I do. My coworker in the next office was reminding me today that during the ice storm here of more than a decade ago, farmers were going without hydro in their houses so that they could run the generators in their barns because their animals came first. So you're making a general statement about animal care and how farmers care for their animals, and then backing up it up with very specific examples from you or your farm or your sector or what you do in your company. And then the time technique. A lot of Canadians have very outdated opinions about food and farming, and they long for that pastoral type farm that they think existed decades or generations ago, and the time technique is a really good way of putting things like that in context. So the best example I ever I saw of this one was I was running a tour for culinary students in Ottawa a number of years ago, and we toured a hog farm just outside of Ottawa, and two brothers run that farm, and they're very well-spoken guys. And so the first barn we toured was a barn, an older style bank barn, and the students were all in biosecurity outfits, and they took us through that older barn, and the barn was dark, and the pen sizes weren't great, and it was kind of just it was just a typical old bank barn. And then they walked us across the barnyard, and they took us into their brand new pig barn. And pigs weren't even in it yet. It had just been finished, and the pigs were going to move into it in a couple of weeks. And they said, that last barn is the barn that our grandfather built. And, at the time, it was absolute state of the art. And, my grandpa was really excited to have it. And then this is the barn that we're building, and it's state of the art, and we just can't wait to get our pigs into it. And it was bright and airy and could be easily cleaned, etc. And then one of them said, and I can't wait to see the barn that our kids or our grandkids design. And it just really went to show how agriculture is always changing. We've got, researchers across this country working on, ever improving what we do. GPS technology in the cabs of our tractors and combines helps with precision agriculture to a level that my grandpa could have never imagined. And so talking about, how things were done in the past, how they're being done now, and then how we're always working towards a better future is just a really great way to look forward and address some of those outdated concerns. And this is probably one that I use more than many of them here, because often when we're talking to consumers at various events, they may have a grandparent that lived on a farm or an aunt and uncle, but most of the time they're now living in an urban center and they just have no access to farms. And when we hosted our Breakfast on the Farm event, which was a big event we ran in the Ottawa area earlier this year, we had 2,300 people show up at a farm for breakfast at a dairy farm, a beautiful dairy farm, and they just couldn't believe the modern technology that was at work in that farm to, to produce safe, healthy milk and to keep the cows comfortable and healthy and content. So anyway, that's that technique. And then the map technique, some people may have heard about farming in different parts of the country or in different parts of the world. You may be the expert on your farm, and if so, you are the expert on your farm or in your business, and that's what you should talk to. If you don't know about farming in the United Kingdom or in China or in other parts of the world, you shouldn't be talking about that. So take that world context and say, you know what, I don't know anything about that issue in the United Kingdom, but what I can tell you is here in Canada, here in Ontario, here in Alberta, wherever you are, here's what we're doing, and on my farm, here's what I'm doing. So it's really good for putting issues into perspective. So I guess this is where the challenge part of the webinar comes about. You saw back on those early slides about how credible farmers and agribusiness staff are. And I know we're all crazy busy. The fact is that, the fact that you're giving an hour and a bit to this webinar is a real thing. But if 50 farmers or 50 agribusiness staff took 10 minutes a day, 5 days a week, you would equal one full-time employee with a lot more credibility with the public. And you may say, well, what can I do in 10 minutes? There are so many things you can do to be a good ag advocate. You can, just answer one question at church or at your local fall fair or at a grocery store when you're hearing a consumer, expressing concern or questions about something in their food aisle. You can have that airport conversation like I do. You can send out 1 or 2 tweets a day. If you're interested in getting into blogs, we are always looking for guest bloggers on our websites, or there's many, many other blog sites in Canada that you could use. You could write a letter to the editor. You could host a tour. You could work at an exhibit, and the list goes on. And I would encourage you afterwards to go on to our website and check out this brochure called Proudly Presenting Agriculture, which is kind of tips and tricks on everything from hosting a farm tour to giving a media interview to writing a letter to the editor, and there's a lot of great advice in there. And then you've got this incredible resource in the Ag More Than Ever website. I was trolling through there again this morning, and I can't believe all the amazing resources on there. You've got photographs and facts and infographics and tons of social media resources, all designed to help you tell the story about Canadian food and farming. And it's the most incredible database, and I would encourage you, when you've got time, to wander through that site and double check and just make sure you know what's on there. And as I mentioned earlier, here's one example. Andrew Campbell here in Ontario, who uses the Twitter feed Fresh Air Farmer, came up with the idea between Christmas and New Year's that he would like to tweet out a picture of each day using the Farm365 hashtag. There have been some activists try to take over that Twitter feed, but there are also a lot of farmers all across this country, and a lot in the US I noticed as well, that are now jumping on this to tell their stories, one photo and one fact at a time. And Andrew told me last week that he's got teachers contacting him saying, we've assigned this to our school class. He's got consumers contacting him saying, hey, I've got a question about milk production. And as we get into the spring and planting season, there'll be a lot of tweets about that. And this is an example of 10 minutes a day and what you can do. And I think this initiative is super. This is our flagship piece that I am super proud of. The Real Dirt on Farming is a booklet that we first published in 2006 and re-released in 2010. and I have just relaunched it in 2014. Last November, the new version came out. It is meant to be a one-stop shop, facts and figures about Canadian agriculture document, both in English and French. And our goal is to get this out across the country over the next year or so. It was written, again, going back to that Ipsos Read survey that we do every few years. We took the 2012 survey and we went through and determined what the top questions and concerns were from the average Canadian, and then we write this book to answer those questions. It's written from a farmer and a helpful expert perspective, and it's simple answers. We don't want to be the encyclopedia on every one of these, but with dozens and dozens of sources, so that if they do want to know more information, they've got lots of places to go and get it. We had about 30 reviewers from across this country review it. A lot of subject matter experts that are people that are a lot smarter than me, making sure that the subject matter of their area of expertise was right. I'm so proud that we had commodity groups from PEI to Newfoundland to BC involved in providing photos and farm profiles and helping with facts and stats. And then we actually did something really interesting this year. We again used Ipsos, and we got a panel of 20 non-farming Canadians, and we tested the booklet on them before it went to press. So sure, it's a great thing that we're going to spend $500,000 producing this booklet, but if nobody will read it, that's a huge problem. So we went to them with a number of draft layouts, a number of sample covers, and said, you know, would you read this? Do you understand it? And that was a really, really useful process for us. They determined the pictures that would appear on the cover. A lot of the photos that I thought were really self-explanatory, they came back with questions saying, we have absolutely no idea what you're trying to tell us here. You're being too preachy in this section, etc. So we think that their involvement really made this booklet a lot stronger, and we're really, really proud of the final result. So our goal is to get 1 million copies of this booklet out across Canada over the next few months. We were thrilled that the PEI Federation of Agriculture inserted a copy in every issue of the Charlottetown Guardian back in December. We have a 12-page digest version that will be going in the National Globe and Mail in March, with a call to action for Canada's leaders that read that magazine to come to the website and read the whole booklet and enter a Canadian food and farming contest and learn more. And we have a vision later this year for more video resources, an app to go with it, a Real Dirt on Farming blog, and we're looking for farm and agribusiness bloggers to join that team, and much, much more. The one thing that we're really excited about in conjunction with the Real Dirt on Farming is a new Speakers Bureau training program that we tested here in Ontario in the fall, and we're about to roll it out across country. So we're often asked here to provide farmers that will come in and talk to audiences, whether they be municipal groups or Lions clubs or chambers of commerce or school classes. And sometimes we've had problems finding farmers that are comfortable in their public speaking skills or in giving a PowerPoint presentation to come in and tell those stories. So we're offering professional presentation skills training. We did this with 4 pilot sessions in November, and we'll start in earnest here in a week or so. 5 presentations customizable to the topic that you want to talk about and to your specific audience. So whether you're really interested in farm animal care, farming in the environment, farming and food safety, farming 101, or just answering questions about the top myths that exist in Canadian agriculture. So in a new day-long workshop, we take participants through those 5 presentations that we have prepared and then say to them, now take these and make them your own. Sub out all of our pictures for pictures of you and your farm or your agribusiness, and tell your stories about food and farming. And copies of those booklets, of the Real Dirt on Farming booklet, will then be left with audience members. The first 4 sessions went great. We have 7 sessions planned in Ontario for the next coming weeks. and they're all filling up. They're all sold out. And we're also bringing in provincial facilitators next week from British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Prince Edward Island. They are going to do the training here and then take the program back and hopefully be rolling it out in their provinces before the end of the winter. If you don't see your province named in this list and you would like to get involved, we are very much looking for groups that will help lead this cause and this effort in the other provinces, and I would love to hear from you. So then the Real Dirt on Farming Speakers Bureau program will then be delivered by provincial organizations like the Alberta Farm Animal Care, like Farm and Food Care Saskatchewan, like the PEI Federation of Agriculture, with support from the Farm and Food Care Foundation. We think there's a huge need for this, and to have that farm team of farmers and agribusiness across this country that are excited to tell their stories and are keen to get started. We just think the sky's the limit, and we're already in Ontario getting calls from service clubs and municipal council meetings and high school groups that are saying, can you find us somebody from your program to speak to our classes or our groups? So anyway, stay tuned for more on that, or send me an email afterwards. So that's kind of what I had planned. The one thing I would draw your attention to is that we do have a monthly e-newsletter where we're always talking about all of the programs we have to offer. We offer training tips. We'll tell you about the latest dates for training seminars and Speakers Bureau workshops. If you just jot down that info@farmfoodcare.org email address and send me a note afterwards, either I could A, send you a copy of the Real Dirt on Farming booklet if you hadn't seen it, or B, I'd be happy to subscribe you to that monthly e-news list where you can get all sorts of more information on everything I've talked about here, or we could talk about full training programs for people in your parts of the country. But anyway, that's how you can find us. That's our two websites for Farm and Food Care Ontario and the Farm and Food Care Foundation, our phone numbers, and where you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and on YouTube. And at this point, I've probably talked really fast, and you have a lot of questions, so we can open it up for questioning if you've got any. Eager to hear from you.
Hi, Kelly. Yeah, this is Matthew Lepari. I'm back. We did have some questions for you. I wasn't sure if you could actually see them on the screen, but I could look through a couple of them. So, one of the questions we have is, what would be the logical and efficient steps to start a chapter of farm and food care in a province or a region with more than one province?
Oh, great question. So I suspect that over the next few years, you're going to see varying levels of types of farm and food cares come on board. So Farm and Food Care Ontario, I've only talked to you about the ag advocacy, the public outreach side of things, but we also do a lot of work in the areas of animal care and environmental programming for farmers in this province. And the Farm and Food Care Saskatchewan does the exact same thing. Now in Prince Edward Island, I was there in October and had a meeting with a lot of their farm organizations. They're thinking of starting, but it may just be, one person working on something like a Breakfast on the Farm initiative, or a media tour for media in Prince Edward Island, or some of those kind of those really visible advocacy outreach efforts. We are very much hoping that there'll be farm and food care experiences and involvement. But if an individual or an organization is interested in talking about how they could partner, with the Farm and Food Care Foundation, we have templates on a lot of our different projects. So you want to plan a breakfast on the farm in your province, we'll help you walk through it. If you want to plan a media tour for food writers and chefs and bloggers in your province, we've got the template and would love to help you. So, depending on the programs and the levels of service, it can be a fairly simple start.
I think that should get people well on their way. We have another question, which is, and it's a bit of a tricky one. How do you explain the major drop of credibility of CFIA and AFC regarding food safety?
I actually don't have an answer for that one. So everybody, if you looked at that slide in believability of information about food safety, and I'm gonna see if I can use my magic technology here that they told me how to do. I'm close. Let me just hold on. There we are. That's the slide. If you look at it, it seemed to be a more skeptical audience that we polled in 2012 versus 2009. And if you look at it, so the 2012 numbers are in orange and the 2006 numbers are in blue. Everybody dropped in credibility except dietitians. I think all the rest are down somewhat. So it seemed to be a more skeptical audience that they just didn't really want, they were a little more skeptical of all their sources in that area. And beyond that, I don't have any real answers for that one.
No, that's completely fair. We have another question here. Hi, Kelly. Are there any plans for any initiatives particularly aimed at youth?
Great question. We were just talking about that in the office this week. We did a talk to students at the University of Guelph earlier this week, and they are all fired up. They're agricultural students. So I'm going to say we'll have a better answer for that next week after all of the provincial facilitators come into Ontario, and we have 3 days together because we're going to be doing a lot of brainstorming. We do have an Ag Ambassador program that we run here at Farm and Food Care Ontario, and we do a lot of speaking to 4-H clubs and agricultural students and groups like that. But I don't know about in the other provinces, but we are really hoping that this Speakers Bureau program has a youth component of it. So stay tuned.
Very good. All right. And then expanding on the first question you had, what would be the best way to get involved with farm and food care in your own province, assuming there's already a provincial group established?
Oh, great question. I would say send an email to that organization. Whether it's us, whether it's Saskatchewan, and just say that you're eager to be a volunteer to get more involved. Start by taking our Speakers Bureau training or coming out to one of our events. We are always, in Ontario specifically, we're always looking for volunteers to help us with various activities or events. So once we know who you are, you may not be able to get rid of us.
Okay, very good. Another question, we have a few questions coming in here. So one of the questions, and this is going back to some of the tools that you were and techniques you were talking about earlier, is it worth it to engage with environmental activists in a public forum, like a letter to the editor or Facebook? And how would you do this without looking like you have something to hide?
Good question. I always say that the one that works best for me is to have a bit of a buddy system. So I would always say it's always crucial to set the record straight. So if there has been an article run in your local newspaper that is absolutely dead wrong, by all means send off a letter to the editor and set the record straight. You've gotta call them on it, and you've always got to use every chance you've got to set the record straight. In terms of a public debate, I always say stay away from a confrontational type of approach. We always say here that we never engage activists. We don't really think there's anything to be gained from doing that. There are a lot of Canadians that would love to learn more. So why spend all of our time dealing with reactive issues versus proactive issues? So I would say not engaging with them, but certainly setting the record straight. So if they've written a letter to the editor in one of your local publications, why not write a response by all means? And sending it to somebody like me to have a quick look at is always a great idea too. I know there have been many occasions in my career where I've written 2 letters. The letter I would really like to send, and then the letter that I know I should appropriately send. And writing the one makes me feel better, and then I shred it, and then I send the more appropriate, more polite, more reasonable letter. So sometimes sleeping on it for 24 hours is a good idea.
Well, thank you. I think that's all the time we have for questions today. So I would like to thank you very much on behalf of Agriculture More Than Ever and Farm Management Canada for that excellent webinar. And I'd also like to thank Agriculture More Than Ever for putting on this webinar today.